Welcome everybody. It's lovely to see you. Thank you for joining us. I should say Selamat siang semuanya. It's lovely to see you here for Dekat-Dekat Jauh. This is the first in a 4-part series, a collaboration between Santy Saptari Art Consulting and Asialink Arts at the University of Melbourne. Santy's going to do some more formal introductions about this session. And really it's my job just to welcome you on behalf of Asialink Arts as the director. My name is Pippa Dixon. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which the University of Melbourne operates, that is the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nations, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And because I'm in Nipalina in Lutruwita, which is Hobart, Tasmania, I also pay my respects to the Palawa and Pakani people of this nation that I'm on as well. So thank you very much. These are some of the most resilient peoples in the world. There are a few housekeeping rules that I would like to share with you as well about today. It's going to go for a little bit over an hour, this conversation, and there will be Q&A at the end. I'd like to welcome Bala Starr, who Santy is going to introduce in a few moments. He's going to do the job of moderating today's discussion. We are all on mute. All of the participants will be on mute. There is a chat function, of course, at the bottom. Feel free to use it to ask questions, but please don't use it for making comments or chatting with the friends that you're looking forward to catching up with just yet, because all of us will see those coming up and it may distract the speakers. At the end, there will be an opportunity for a group photo, and my dog is scratching behind me, so I'm going to tell her to stop. Art dog. Her name's Art, so it's appropriate anyway. So I would ask that you participate until the end so that we can grab a group photo. And if you are cooking your dinner in Australia, because it's that time of the day in Melbourne and the eastern states, do turn on your camera towards the end so you can join us in that group photo opportunity. So I would like to welcome Santy and pass over to her to give some more details about today's session and where it's come from. Thank you, Santy.
Thank you, Pippa. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm very excited to be here with all of you today at the first of 4 conversations of Dekat-Dekat Jauh, so near, yet so far. Dekat-Dekat Jauh aims to bringing together artists, institutional representatives, collectors, and key players in Indonesian and Australian art scenes to question what the art can do to build trust, understanding between nations, and promote deeper connections. I'm Santy Saptari from Santy Saptari Art Consulting, and before we get started with today's conversation, I wanted to tell you briefly about how the Dekat-Dekat Jauh series came about. In the past 18 years, I have lived and worked in both Indonesia and Australia. During my time in Australia, I always felt that despite the proximity of the 2 countries, there was little or not enough engagement or cooperation between Indonesia and Australia in the area of visual arts. I always thought it was because of a lack of interest in Indonesia from Australia's side. Due to the pandemic, however, I've returned home to Jakarta. It's been almost a year now. And during my stay in Jakarta, I actually came to realizations that there is little interest in a collaboration with Australia as well from our side in Indonesia. We do not know much or enough, I think, about Australia. And perhaps as a result, we hardly talk or think about Australia in the visual art sector. That's when I started thinking about an event where discussion can be had about Indonesia-Australia relationship within the context of visual arts. And Asialink Art seemed to be the right partner to collaborate with. So I was very happy to be connected to Pippa by Bala Starr, who share my enthusiasm and ambition, who was able to bring this project to another level as well by turning it into a 4 conversation series that is taking place starting from today until March. Therefore, I would like to thank Pipa and Bala Starr for realizing this project. So here we are today with the first conversation of Dekat-Dekat Jauh, which will be followed by the next 3 conversations on every Saturday at 1 p.m. Jakarta time. For more details on the event, please visit Asialink's art website or my website for weekly updates on the topic and list of speakers. And moving beyond the conversation series, we will also publish a report with key thematic findings of each conversation. Now, without further ado, let's get started with the conversation. Let me introduce you to the moderator of today's conversation, Bala Starr. I've known Bala over 20 years, and Bala Starr is a curator, writer, and cultural producer. Her extensive experience in contemporary art includes serving as director of the Institute of Contemporary Arts in Singapore from 2013 to 2019. And previously, Bala was a senior curator at the Ian Potter Museum of Art, where we met and where she led the exhibition, acquisition, and publishing programs. She is currently the director of La Trobe Art Institute at La Trobe University. Thank you again for joining us, and over to you, Bala.
Thank you so much, Santy and Pippa. And before we begin, I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm a visitor on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I extend my respect to elders past and present. It is really a great pleasure to be with you today, and especially to speak with these distinguished artists, some really eloquently, as I've discovered, about their experiences and perspectives of Australia and Indonesia. And those experiences are each very different, one from the other. And this is important. It's our intention as a group to acknowledge the complexities, the chance encounters, and the turning points that inform relationships between artists, especially across the seas. It's unusual on reflection for artists with deep experience of Indonesia and Australia to have the opportunity like this to speak together. Both countries have long cultural memories, and like anywhere, cultural histories tend to be consumed by contemporary life and the modern world as we know it. Through the work of contemporary artists such as these, we can experience a kind of remembering and reaching back to the knowledge and also the modes of the past, and understand something more about ourselves in the present through those very processes. So again, I think it's important that we have this occasion to speak with Indonesian and Australian artists and just to respect how significant that moment is. I wanted to also thank Santy Saptari and Pippa Dixon again from Asialink Arts for inviting me to moderate. As Santy said, we met nearly 20 years ago this year when she was an intern, and I can honestly say I think Santy, you were probably, and what an honour that was, and we've remained in touch ever since, and I always welcome any opportunity to come close to your work, Santy.
Thank you.
I also wanted to say that the kinds of relationships that Santy has engendered with Australia and Indonesia are really indicative of the kinds of very special relationships that mimic. And I wanted to acknowledge the ongoing pain and struggle brought about by the pandemic, particularly in Indonesia, and to send our well wishes for all of you in Indonesia and our hopes for fast improvement. We are very fortunate in Australia currently that the situation is under control, and I hope that we can do everything we can to support those near neighbours, such as, of course, Indonesians. I'm going to now have the pleasure of introducing our 4 artists to you today, and they each have extensive biographies, and Dinda, I think, is going to include in the chat now links to their websites and to key resources for you to pursue in your own time. We considered introducing the artists with images of their work, but realised it would be tokenistic and a simple sort of glimpse. We'd like to invite you to take your time to consider the work through the work itself. And to that end, I'm going to introduce each of our artists with a simple one line which addresses their recent practice. So you can imagine, you know, in some cases, decades of history and practice and engagement behind these simple one lines, which are really to acknowledge the present moment in which we live. Starting with Abdul-Rahman Abdullah, who is based in Perth. Hello, Abdul-Rahman. His sculptural work is the subject of a major survey at a university art museum, the John Curtin Gallery, Perth. And if you're in the area, it closes on the 23rd of April. Febie Babyrose is based in Bandung. She's one of a trio of friends who comprise the Tromarama collective. And Tromarama's work is part of the current NGV triennial, which runs until the 18th of April. Hello, Febie. Next, we have Jumaadi, who is based in Sydney. Hello. His work is included in the 13th Gwangju Biennale, about to open on the 1st of April. So unfortunate that you can't travel there, Jumaadi. In fact, that none of us can travel there currently. It is titled Minds Rising, Spirits Turning. And finally, certainly not least, is Tintin Wulia, who is currently a research project leader at the Centre on Global Migration, University of Gothenburg. And she's, is that correct, Tintin? No, you're shaking your head there. Please correct me, Tintin.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I mean, I'm not in the Center on Global Migration anymore, but I am a research project leader for my own project with the Hodukovaland.
Thank you,
Protocols
Tintin.
of Killings, yeah.
Thank you. Tintin is based in Brisbane, and we'll hear more about the way that she moves around in relation to her practice and her exhibition history very soon. Thank you, Tintin. Now, just in terms of how we imagine this session working, we don't really have any rules. We want to have a kind of conversation between ourselves, but also to welcome your own comments at any time in the chat, and especially at the end in a sort of more Q&A format. We want this conversation to unfold as best it can, conversation to bring some of those issues and themes forward now. But I thought, may I invite perhaps Tintin to begin by talking about your early encounters. You have a really fascinating story of an encounter with Australia that came about through sort of, we could say, circuitous means, not necessarily directly through the art world, but what you introduced through that story, Tintin, is a very robust sense of the context for this kind of international exchange. Would you like to tell us your story?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, well, okay, I'll try to structure it so it's interesting. Yeah, one of the first times I came to Australia, I think it was actually the first time, was because suddenly SBS TV Australia contacted me out of the blue. I didn't know they existed, actually, to asking to purchase the broadcast right of my 2 short films. And so so instead of just sending them, I was thinking, okay, so this is, you know, Australia, and purchasing film for broadcast right, this is something really new to me, right? And this was, I think, 2001 or something. And so I made the 2 short films that they were asking were made in 2000. And what happened was basically, because that was one of the first few works that I actually distributed. I sent them to, like online film festivals and really in Indonesia at that point. Held by Confident, Komunitas Film Independent in Indonesia. And then, so basically they went to a lot of places. And suddenly SBS contacted me, and I was like, okay, very curious. And I sort of combined the trip to actually bring bring the masters of the film to SBS with a short course in AFTRS in Sydney, Australian Film, Television and Radio School, right? And so I had a short course, and that was also, you know, like the first time I had a short course in filmmaking. It was documentary filmmaking, and met quite a few of Australian film and television people there as well. And then I went to SBS, and you know, met up with the program director there for Eat Carpet. That was the program. Maybe some of you who lived in Australia at that point would remember Eat Carpet. And yeah, and basically, so I met them and I asked, okay, so where did you find my films? And they were saying, well, in film market in Germany. So it was, you know, the film get to Australia, one of my first encounters with Australia, and that was also, I guess it brought Australia into my radar, of course, but you know, of course, before then I knew that Australia was there, and there were, you know, because I lived in Bali, it was, you know, there were some encounters with Australians as well, but it was, that was the first time that I sort of considered, wow, you know, yeah, I mean, you know, oh, and also I saw Eat Carpet, of course, and that brought me to also think about doing something else, something similar in Indonesia, but to use a short film as a medium for stimulating discussions. So more like, and that's why I found it. So, oh, and we screened, of course, in other, like there are 3 cities where we screen and do screenings and discussions, and using short film to discuss issues, basically.
Tintin, may I also ask you, in terms of, you had been brought up in Bali, and could you just share something about your thinking around departing from Bali, and also this incredible spreadsheet you project managed your move, like for you at that moment?
Yeah, the moment actually came, I mean, you know how when you look back and see that, oh, okay, so everything actually, you know, led up to that. It's, I mean, my background, maybe it's a bit different. Well, I mean, we're all different, I guess. So in Indonesia, of course, you know, like I would be called Cina. You know, I'm a Chinese Indonesian, although I don't know what that means actually. But also part of that is also, oh, not part of that. Well, on top of that, I also had to keep a secret, as you know, my family was impacted by the Indonesian mass killings, 65, 66. So I knew sort of that I was different. On top of, well, the centers of Indonesia would call daerah, you know. So daerah means, you know, and it's this is one of my pet peeves actually, that the way people say daerah is like, oh, what do you mean? It's daerah means region, but I always, when I hear it, it always feels like I hear, oh, well, we're the colonial region or something, you know. And so I'm not part of the centers, but all this actually sort of trained me to see out, like, because I'm not in the center, there's always some other centers, right? So so it was actually like I see myself as privileged being in that position, from the margins, basically. And so and being in Bali also, well, you know, like it's my upbringing. I grew up actually in a music school, so my parents had it's still running actually now. Have a music school, and a lot of Western ethnomusicology in Bali when I was growing up would need Western instruments, and they also adopted. Our first computer was, for example, the ZX81, which came in a self-assembly kit in 1981, and so and we had to, like to play a game, we had to actually type in the codes and then press run, and then we can play. But anyway, so this kind of thing. But the thing is also, he got that ZX81 directly, I think, from the US. So it's it's sort of like living in a world of globalism already at that point. And so basically, when I was lucky to get a scholarship to do my music study in Boston, and then and while I was doing my architecture internship as well. But then when I came back, it was 1998. And I came back to an Indonesia that was really, like changing. I was only out for 2 years, but the 2 years change was really rapid. Mm-hmm. And so basically in '98, I first experienced the leading up to the riots, and the riots itself as well. And for me, it connected to 65, this story that runs in the family that was a secret, and basically. It's sort of, it was formative. It was always formative. Anyway,
Tintin, sorry, may I interrupt? Because I think it's interesting at this point to think about even the comparison with Jumaadi's experience of coming to Australia to study at the National Art School, which is such a sort of direct, isn't it, and formative time for you, Jumaadi, arriving at 23, is that right?
Yes.
So you've lived now half your life in Australia, but can you think back to that time of studying and particularly studying a kind of art that you understood was not relatable at home?
Yeah. I grew up in a small kind of smallish village, south part of Surabaya. My parents they farm fish and rice. It is a mangroves area. There's so water, canoe, fish trap were things that were very close and very familiar to my upbringing. And and when I finished high school, throughout the high school was I was in Islamic sort of boarding schools and also Islamic schooling, technically. And the first time I left home, then I was in Jogja, not studying, just spending time. Skip in between. When I come to Sydney, I had a dream of becoming a sort of macho photojournalist. That's what I understood. I didn't understand art by then, actually I wrote poetry since I was quite young. So I was okay with words. And so I guess I would like to study literature or something, but the language was in between when I come to Australia. And also journalism is not an option. And then I saw an exhibition of photographic, it was art photography, or photographic exhibition was by graduate of art school. I was fascinated by it, and then I went to the school. I took short courses in photography studies, but somehow when I get into the school, the art school, then I took painting as a major. And it was good because the theory was not extensive. And a lot of technical hand-on sort of teaching, how to apply paint on the surface, on different mediums, and the different kind of painterly traditions, looking into the American traditions and then Australian traditions, and very sort of random art history based on European traditions. And that was my training, a lot of like American art training, you know, a lot of drunken men, of course, our hero. And when I graduated, I went back to Sidoarjo to try to spend time with my family, and none of them couldn't understand, like, why would I paint that way? And I was very disappointed, and of course I thought that, you know, there is some kind of beauty that I'd like to, a lot of beautiful memory and also landscape into, you know, variation of mark makings and order in terms of, you know, lyrical and all of those. But the disappointment then encouraged me to learn more about a traditional culture, in a sense. So I spent a lot of time then hanging around with puppet masters and traditional musicians throughout East Java. That gave me a lot of confidence in the way of seeing things. And when I come back again to Australia, I also travel across the land and working with indigenous communities and doing a lot of landscape painting again, like, you know, just between you, the bear of the landscape. Yes, yeah, I get familiar with the, I get familiar with this practice.
Yes, I think, you know, what you say is so interesting, because difference in reception and thinking about contemporary art, but also you talk about the parallels in the landscape that you found between Indonesia and Australia.
The reason I was interested in the landscape was also when on my third year of the art school, we did this long trip of 1 month, driving from Sydney to off Alice Spring, and each town or each places we would camp for a couple of nights or something. And some of the long drives, like in the dark night, I couldn't keep myself. I was not joking that I thought left and right was rice field, endless rice field. This is in the central desert of Australia. And I was like, maybe I'm missing my rice, but I got a lot of rice in my backpack. So not to worry, but somehow my mind was not, you know, I couldn't comprehend all the landscape that, you know, like we drive hours, 5 hours in the evening, maybe like 3 hours in the morning, things like that. And long drives, and all I could see was just a rice field. And yeah, and it got me really curious about the landscape.
Yeah, thank you, Jumaadi. I'm wondering, Abdul-Rahman Abdullah, you know, if you can also just, you have this really beautiful way of describing your encounters, so to speak, with different cities in Indonesia in relation to your own personal history. And could you talk about, in this case, perhaps all of the 3 trips that you've made and what they meant at the time?
Hi there. Hi, everyone. Just say I'm coming in from Wajak Noongar country in Western Australia, and I'm paying my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. Yeah, my name's Abdul-Rahman Abdullah, and I'm here in Perth, Western Australia. Yeah, and when I was contacted to be a part of this, I was very conscious that I'm sort of the least qualified person to be talking about, you know, Indonesia and Australia. My background is my mum's Malay. Her family originated in Indonesia, and this is something I've researched in my own art practice, but that was almost 400 years ago. You know, she's part of the Bugis community in Malaysia. And so my encounters within, I mean, I have a, you know, I feel like I have a connection to Indonesia through Malaysia, but feeling like you've got a connection is very different to going there. And I don't speak Bahasa, for example, and it's very different to, you know, going there and feeling completely comfortable at home. The 3 times I have actually been to Indonesia, you know, once I've been to Bali as a complete tourist from Perth, from Australia. And it doesn't, if you're an Australian person like me who looks and sounds very Australian, despite my hidung Malayo, as they say in Malaysia, but yeah, I can't help but feel I'm just one of those. As much as I want to resist that idea of being an Australian tourist in that context, that's what I am. So you know, there's a certain, I guess, embarrassment that comes with that. And so I saw Bali from a very, I hate the word Aussie perspective, but I saw it from that perspective. Other times I've been to Indonesia, you know, for an artist in Australia, everyone goes to Jogja at some point because, you know, Jogja's Jogja. And I went with my brother, Abdullah, who has got really strong connections to Jogja. And he's, you know, worked with artists there on a lot of projects and still works over many years with a lot of artists there. He's built those relationships. So I just went while he was there just to see the place and, you know, experience some of that. And the other time I had been to Indonesia was going to Sulawesi Selatan with my dad, who is white Australian, but he speaks very good, very fluent Bahasa. And I was actually retracing one of his journeys that he took in 1969. So he'd been through Bali and Sulawesi and there all the way overland to India as a teenager in the 60s. So I was retracing some of his journey, you know, almost 50 years later, but at the same time retracing my own family history because my family had left there in the 1600s. And it turned out that I was the first one to ever go back for, like, I think it was 14 generations later. So I wanted to connect my family tree, from what I understood in Malaysia, to this sort of, you know, where it had come from in Sulawesi, but it turns out in South Sulawesi. So I went there, went through Makassar, and Makassar has its own connections to Australia, which everyone here kind of understands. People get very excited about that, and it really is a very strong connection. But it was, people wanted to apply that to me, but it wasn't really my connection because that was Makassar, and it was a different place to, you know, it's hard to understand from Australia, coming from Australia where everything is so spaced out, so spacious. I live on a farm. There's 3,000 acres with 4 people. It's, and trying to understand how compact, how dense, and how complex it is in Indonesia. I feel like I had an idea of that. I didn't understand that, but I knew that was the case. And that's all you need, I think, sometimes. You just need to know that it's going to be far beyond what you think you know. But it was really interesting for me to go to Indonesia, and not in any art sense. It was my own research, you know, go to Makassar, travel up through Toraja and end up in Palopo. And to me, one of the most beautiful things when I went there is my dad liked to visit all the mosques. He's a white Australian Muslim convert, and they love visiting all the mosques. And I'm like, okay, I hadn't been into a mosque for a while, but, you know, at least they have fans and air conditioning. So I was happy about that. But when we got up to Palopo, and my dad he just loves, you know, meeting strangers, and they love me. Everyone loves it when, you know, this sort of bearded white guy comes in and he's really fluent, and he's, you know, that's a real access point. He explained why we were there, and people like an old man in the mosque when he knew who my ancestors were who left 400 years ago. And it's like, they're Merantau, you know, they're gone, and they embraced me as like Orang Palopo, and I was like, oh, wow, that really blew my mind. And so I connected my family tree. It actually turned out to be a lot easier than I thought, because it was in I ended up meeting the Sultan of Luwu, who was up there, and in the palace they've got a family tree which stopped with these 5 brothers, and there's nothing beyond that. This is just part of this big family tree. And in Malaysia, that's where it started, with those 5 brothers. So I was like, oh, well, this is really easy. And so for someone who grew up in Australia, understanding I have a history, but not seeing the evidence of it until going there. And then it was sort of so ordinarily presented to me, this history that went back to the 12th century. And so there was like, and it was so like big and small at the same time. I was like, okay, there's the information. That was actually pretty easy, but it took, you know, 14 generations. When my family left, they were banished and they weren't allowed to go back. And in Malaysia, they took that to heart and never went back. But I felt that 14 generations or so, I felt that I could, you know, maybe they'd forgotten. But no, but I went back and I found that sort of entered my art practice, and I made some work about that. Anyway, that was sort of my 3 very different. What I did like about that those three sort of entry points was, like I am here in Perth, we're far away. I'm 4,000 kilometers away from Sydney or Melbourne. I am very peripheral. We are one of the most isolated cities in the world. And I feel like those areas I went to in Indonesia, they weren't Jakarta. I'm very aware that, you know, the density of Indonesia and how that concentration gathers around Jakarta, as far as I know. And I like to experience these places from these outer places, because while they could be regarded as peripheral, nowhere is peripheral. Where people are, it's the center of the world, you know. So I can feel like I'm the center of my own world on this farm in Western Australia, going to visit centers of other people's worlds. I feel like I'm seriously, when I visit Indonesia, I'm the kampung boy. You know, I'm the little brother going to visit the big brother. That's the reality, you know. And for an Australian person, that is the reality. And if they're not expecting that, then that will slap them in the face when they jump out of a taxi in any Indonesian city and go, you know, shit, the world is bigger. It's a big place, and I love that.
Thank you, Abdul-Rahman. I mean, when I hear you speak so compellingly around the sort of discoveries that come also in adulthood, you know, it makes me think that there's a kind of I think a number of Australians, you know, who come from different backgrounds will be able to find echoes in their own sort of discovery and rediscovery and negotiation of those pasts that somehow something, you know, that very tangible for a lot of us, I think, in those stories.
Well, I love that. You have this idea which is so romanticized, you know, so much of my way of thinking about even Malaysia, let alone Indonesia, comes through my mum, who was, you know, her memories from the 1960s or 50s. And then going there and just being slapped in the face with just how provincial I am. You know, I love that. You know, I go there and I go, I can't handle that pace. Even in Jogja, the pace, like, I've never been in a taxi which drove so fast as in Jogja. I was scared, but I love that. You know?
Abdul-Rahman, can we now go to Febie Babyrose? Febie, you've actually had what I think is an extraordinary introduction to Australia, if we can call it an introduction. You've sort of gone what I think of as straight to the top of our major institutions, NGA, NGV, Queensland Art Gallery, you know, very large, ambitious projects. And as I said to you, I think most Australian artists have not exhibited in those very premises. And I wondered if you could share with us, you know, also some of your experience. Perhaps you talked earlier about the NGV Kids experience for Tromarama and how that felt for you. Could you share that with us?
Hello, Bala. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Yeah, I think like when the three of us, like our first exhibitions in Australia, it was APT in 2012, and then for us, that is our first triennial projects happening, and then it's also our first time traveling to Australia and Brisbane. And then for us, I think we're very lucky to have this kind of like opportunity to showing our works in Australia, because basically because the three of us, like, we're coming from a really different background. I'm coming from the printmaking studios, and then Herbert and Rudy, they're coming from the graphic design studios from our art school in Bandung. And then we started at 2006, and then actually in the first time we were making Tromarama, we never thought that we could be an artist collective, because in 2006 in 2003 when the first time we're coming to Bandung, we could feel like the energy of the city itself is kind of like having this kind of energy of like do it yourself movement. So they're having kind of like an indie level music happening in here, and then people making their own local business. So it's really like the city, it's really very energized for us. And then actually we started Tromarama, it's in a very like a small room in here. We call it like kos-kosan, like you rent you rent in a room from the landlord, and then you live in your college days in there. And then like the Tromarama itself, we're coming from workshops actually. outside our school, and then we start making a music video at that time in 2006. And then it's very DIY process. We don't have any sophisticated computer to do a programming or making like a very nice video at that time. So that's why our first like early works, we're making stop motions animations, because it's only like a very low specifications of computers, and then like a small digital camera, and then nobody else in our school have like this kind of like a digital camera, so we need to rent from our friends. So it's very like a handmade video. And then also like the feelings, like the art scene in Bandung, not so many people like understand about video as a medium at that time. So that's why in early like 2000s 2006, we still call it like a new media art, and then people like still talking about like this new media art movements. So actually, like we're very happy like with the recognitions, like how people like enjoying our works, because it's really start from very small, and then the three of us like never been school abroad, so we basically just been school in Bandung. So it's very a lucky experience for us.
And you mentioned, well, when we spoke, you talked also about the actual experience of working with those very large, I mean, by Australian standards, we have a lot of art institutions, public institutions, as you know, but they are very large. You know, they're the largest that we have. And I wonder, you know, what was it like to negotiate and to think about different approaches to time and practice as a collective who've developed, you know, ways of working intimately together on projects for a long time, and this DIY approach? What was it like when you encountered these Australian, you know, institutions that had different priorities, so to speak?
So yeah, maybe after the APT, like we do have like this kind of like a solo exhibitions in the kids space at NGV, and then that's also our first experience made exhibitions focusing on kids. Because usually like if we're making exhibitions, it's mostly for adults, and then everybody understand about not to touch, and then yeah, less touch and anything. But while we're working with the kids, it's very different, because like we need to thinking about the aspects of touchings, and then the aspects of the distance about, with the works. And then yeah, it's really like an engaging process for us. And then it's also experience like how the education's purpose it's very strong, because and then afterwards, like while we're thinking like maybe having like after the exhibitions, we were thinking like, you know, this kind of like methodology, like having to make like an exhibitions focusing on kind of like and kids, it could be like a really nice point of views, seeing an art from like a different group age, like that. And then also I'm talking like about how we encounters like with a bigger institutions. Like the first time when we arrived, like we're kind of like amazed with the efficiencies of working time. Yeah. So for example, like for installing, and then site visits, and then also doing experiment, and then research with the kids, we only have maybe kind of like several days, like maybe like less than a week, and then like each a phase, and then like it's working kind of like a 9 to 5 inside the gallery, like meeting people, and then it is very efficient. Like what I acknowledge, it is very efficient way to work. I mean, like comparing to Indonesia, like if we're discussing about the concept or the ideas, it could take a lot, like a days, maybe months. But in there, like the efficiency of times, it's really strong enough. So yeah, it's, for us, it's a very like a new experience. Like it's also I do have like a funny stories, like when we start promoting the works from the NGVs. Like we need to run to the radio stations to promote, not run, like walking to the radio stations to promote our works, like the stuff. Okay, maybe we just need like a 5 minutes of walking to go there. But as an Indonesian, like sometimes we rarely walk because we go by the car or by the motorbike. So we walk slowly, and then like, okay, so Indonesians like walk slowly, and then we need to like, okay, maybe we need to keep up the pace and then start walking faster. And then, yeah, I think that's like what like my first experience, like working with institutions. And then about the more and then it's also talking about the collective, like working collectively. Sorry, Bala, can you repeat the questions about the collectives once again?
Yes, I think, you know, what's of course unique about working within a collective is the patterns of working that you develop up in a very sort of intimate way, that your relationship within this very small, potent group is everything in a way. And when that comes into contact with a large institution, you know, that there can often be challenges, I imagine.
Yeah, but
sometimes
yeah, but sometimes not, because the three of us inside the collective. So when we handle kind of like a project, so we know how to deal with this kind of like a situations, and then make it more kind of like bring it more like an organic way to work inside collective. So I guess,
yeah, that's interesting. So very robust sort of model you already had.
Yeah,
amazing. Now, just a reminder also to all of our audience, feel free to post any questions in the chat, and we are very happy to practice our flexibility and adaptability and refer to those and throw them into the conversation at any time. We can really prove ourselves responsive here. And also the artists themselves, if you have questions of one another, don't hesitate, you know, to ask. But I think, you know, one of the things that's come up, I think, quite a bit in our conversations also prior to today's event is this idea again of the centre and periphery, and the differentiation between cities, both Indonesia and in Australia, but also elsewhere. You know, we talk about nationalism, or, you know, relationships between countries, and use broad terms like exchange. But I think each of you have spoken about the specific localities from which you come, or where you now reside, and what the implications are. And I think, you know, of course, Australian cities where Abdul-Rahman resides, we talked about Perth, but it would be interesting to contemplate also through you, Abdul-Rahman, what that art world was like when you embarked on it there, and also from the others in terms of, you know, even the differences that are sort of broadly understood in terms of stereotypes. But I wonder your perspectives on Bandung, you know, Bali, and on say Ubud, for example, or, you know, other cities, and what this means for our thinking about future exchange and the opportunities there. Abdul, would you like to just start by sort of perhaps reflecting on Perth also, which is an unusual city? In the best sense.
Well, it's funny because when I think of Australian art, I think of Australia as one big city, and Perth is an outer suburb. Because I don't even live in Perth itself. I live south of Perth, not far, but in a very rural setting on a cattle farm south of Perth. But in Australia, the art world is not. The Perth art scene is tiny. There's some good artists that have come out of here. But it's a very tight-knit, very supportive community, but it's very about Bali. Have this assumption that you're the center of anything. And that is a real point of strength. I think it's a privilege to have that perspective, because if you were to assume that you're the center of the world, you know, that's a very good way of disappointing yourself, you know. So Perth I see as a great place to make art, because it's a beautiful city. It's quite a very privileged city, and it's a, you know, a lovely place to, like I always tell people, it's a great place to be poor, because, you know, it's just, it's very privileged. So that those levels, you know, they work in your favor. But as an artist working in Australia, I'm always looking to the cities outside of Australia, to the East Coast, Sydney and Melbourne. And most of what I do and have done is showing in Sydney and Melbourne. I don't show that much in Perth because we have some institutes and we have some good ones, but once you sort of cycle through them, like, you know, there's only so much you can do. All my attention is focused really on Sydney and Melbourne, and I haven't really shown internationally much yet in New Zealand, and I'm more interested in our neighbours like Indonesia, New Zealand, and Southeast Asia. The neighbours, I'm not looking to Europe or America, and may not ever. But what I can say about the Perth art scene is it's a great place to make art. It's not as great a place to show art, but it is an amazing place to make art, because I know a lot of people going to Sydney and Melbourne from Perth, and it's a whole lot of other factors come into it. It's a really expensive city to exist in, especially Sydney. My brother's over there and he's been there for 5 or 6 years now. It is incredibly expensive, and I know how much of people's time and efforts go into just being able to pay the rent in a city like that. It's just a thing. Whereas here I'm sort of really spoiled for space and time, and I just have to deal with very expensive freight and, you know, deadlines, which I have to transport large sculpture, you know, at least 4,000 kilometers every time just to show it. So this is why I haven't really pushed into something overseas, but I'll get there. It'll come. So Perth is just a tiny microcosm of what's happening over east in Australia, and that is a tiny microcosm of what's happening in Indonesia, which is a larger microcosm of what's happening in the world, I guess, and I'm very aware of that. Yeah, I'm the little brother's, cousin's, uncle's, canary's pet. But I love that. It's a point of privilege, you know. You don't assume you're this big man, you know. It's like, that is such a mistake for artists, and it's a big mistake that Australian artists make too, thinking that they are big fish. You know?
You were one of the first artists in this group who just introduced this idea also of the differentiation between the different cities for you, and based in Brisbane now, of course, but living in Melbourne for 10 years earlier.
Yeah. So as you were talking, Abdul-Rahman, I was thinking like, oh yeah, I remember that, you know, like coming to Australia in the mid to late 2000s, I think, there was this video, quarantine flight arrival video, that, you know, like says, you know, like it's, you know, it shows Australia and then it says, Australia is an island. You know, so then, you know, you can't bring, you know, like your apples or stuff in because it's a, you know, bio threat basically. But yeah, I mean, it's that idea of Australia as a one thing, as you said, one city actually. But then you mentioned, oh, you're in the suburbs. So okay, I guess I was actually. I think I questioned the idea of any country as a one single thing, right? I mean, Indonesia has, I don't know, like hundreds of languages. I can't remember the number now, but you know, but also that's indicative of the different ways of living as well. And I guess Australia, I mean, I actually. As a permanent so when I got my permanent residency visa, the first city I came to was actually Darwin, because there was a film festival that I worked with there for a workshop, and I was also judging for the competition, and then they brought me to Catherine, and you know, but of course before then I was already I visited Melbourne, and I visited for Sydney, of course, for SBS. And so, you know, so I started seeing, wow, you know, like of Flores. So I worked in an AusAid project in Flores in 2003 as well. And it was, you know, it just all the vegetation and everything. And when I moved from Melbourne to Brisbane, I was also like, wow, this is, you know, this is tropical. Basically, I can see the banana trees, the papaya trees, you know, and every time I, you know, like I just spot all the banana trees. Oh yeah, that's banana leaf, papaya leaf, you know, to eat. Like, you know. But anyway, and the art scenes are quite different as well. I think in Melbourne, I felt like, you know, becoming an artist, like the institutional paths were so clear that becoming an artist, like, you know, it felt like, at least it seemed from the outside, yeah, that it felt like becoming an artist in Melbourne is like, you know, like becoming a lawyer. So you have to like go to the right school, go hang out with the right people, and then, you know, like get the right residency, and then you're an artist, and you don't even have to show internationally, you're an artist already, like, you know. But you know, and whereas, you know, like, of course, coming from Indonesia, I didn't even know what you know, being an artist mean. Like, you know, in my family, for example, one of my uncles, I mean, a lot of them actually moved out, but one of them actually sort of exiled himself to the Netherlands. So he lived in Rotterdam and he works as an artist. Like, he works as a portrait artist in fairs and festivals. So you know, that's what I knew an artist. And then, you know, then started exhibiting in, you know, like art galleries and stuff. And coming to Brisbane was, I mean, it felt really familiar, I guess, because I guess there are just more nuances here. Like, I guess historically as well, you know, maybe there were more conflicts here as well. And well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know too much actually about the history, but it's just more, what would you call that? There are more differences, I guess, and also people like the artists are more. I mean, I get to know, you know, like artists from the collective Proper Now, for example, and yeah, just, you know, I feel that they are actually also carving that path for, you know, like artists who can't be labeled, sort of, you know, who are not, you know, like this law school path.
Thank you, Tintin. Jumaadi, also we have a question for you, but I wonder, before we go to that, you've spoken also about the sort of social life that artists can desire and can find that when we spoke about, for example, what was in Sydney for you in terms of the kind of broader engagement with other artists and what you personally seek out. And can you comment on that as well in relation to when you return to Indonesia to work as you do? So you are sort of working in both locations. What you seek and what you find in both those locations, perhaps in relation to communities, if you like, or artist conversation.
Yeah. How can we put it nicely? I guess let's start it by, you know, it's quite relative. Things are quite relative in a way, and then as much as we try very hard, we learn. You know, we were trained as a young also to learn to accept to what things might fall in front of you. You know, I guess I come from that kind of tradition. So I'm going to talk highly about Sydney here. It costs money, indeed. I mean, there's no question on that. But then you can wake up in the morning, and if you live in particular part of Sydney, then you can have long walk. And then it's a very, very green, and, you know, the sea is there for you to swim. And you can live very healthy life, or you can choose to have, you know, CBD lifestyle, you know, with party. But again, it's very relative. You can manage, and a lot of things are much cheaper than it is in Indonesia. Like public transport, for example, can get you by. If I was living in some part of Yogyakarta or Bali, I always have to get, you know, before you settle with your motorbike and things, drivers are costly, and it's not easy to cook your own healthy dinner, or you always have to rely on this system that you need to things. And I don't know if you have particular diets or special sort of interest, then food can be in your ways. And this is something to do with also the production of art, culture, to a great degree. Actually, the research, the facilities, the community is things that then will follow. I'm very much in Sydney or in Jogja. Actually, what I'm trying to say is I'm very much interested to myself. The work itself is much more important than engage in a social sort of hierarchy or social systems. For example, like my studio, I practice in Yogyakarta, in Imogiri, in a very quite remote village. So I don't have much social engagement or with my colleagues and friends in Jogja, because they live in the cities. We visit each other in a sort of friendly occasions, but not those hypes that we heard of, that it is a very exciting 24 hours sleepless city or something like that. And and also in Sydney, I live in the northern part of Sydney, and I'm happy to make work here. And a lot of the time in my studio, I make dinners. People can come, and we have musicians, friends, and that comfort me a lot, I guess, within my practice. Also in Imogiri, like I have my village friends there, and we have also a work in Bali, Tintin, by the way. A lot of part of it is in Kelungkung, away from Central. It's a very sort of very old classical village, classical painters village of Kamasan in Kelungkung. Me and Sifon, we live there, and we consider them, or they consider us as a family. So
Jumaadi, I think I might just go to Febie just quickly. Well, not quickly, Febie, but before we come back to your question also. But Febie, I'm wondering if you can also speak about what you sort of gain from Bandung and Jogja, and also, of course, you're traveling very much with Tromarama as international artists. But you've also spoken about when you have come to Australia, for example, that you haven't necessarily had the opportunity to meet other artists here and to return a knowledge of, for example, Australian artists to Bandung and so on.
So yeah, maybe I could say it from the Bandung standpoint, because we do live in here, like the scenery, like the art scene of Bandung. Like we do have like quite a lot of art school in here, but like the platform to showcase their works, it's a very little amounts happening in Bandung. Like I think, like when I'm counting, we do have like more than 5 art school in Bandung, but maybe only like 2 active gallery now open in Bandung. So it's a very big gap happening around like the academics and also the ecosystems of art itself in Bandung. But luckily for us, like the young artists in here, they start opening kind of like an alternative space, or they're starting to like make a collective and then like start building some things together. So I think like it's a really nice ecosystems. Like we share like our knowledge, we share our stories, like experience from other exhibitions to other exhibitions. So from me, like when I'm going to exhibitions, like if I met like someone interesting about their methods, how to make an artworks, like maybe maybe if I'm going back to Bandung, I will share this kind of like a knowledge to other artists, or maybe like to other young artists, you know, like what's happening in somewhere, like it's really interesting. But like but when we visiting the Australia, maybe we don't have this kind of like a enough time to do this kind of like conversations with Australian young artists, or maybe with the conversations with alternative space, like how you dealing with your community, like your art community. So yeah, I think it's a pity, but I guess like now, because we live through the virtual world, I think we need to dig up this kind of like an informations like virtually. But yeah, I think that the conversations, it's a really nice thing to do, like the starts for the for I mean like for Bandung community, like the transfer knowledge about from the established artists and then to the younger ones thing. Yeah.
Forward exactly there at that point. Jumaadi, we have a question, and I'm hoping I'm interpreting this, but I think the question is, well, the question literally is, which one is more interesting for the Australian art world? And I'm imagining this means, what would mean success in the Australian art world? Your artwork in this case, so specific references, if you like, or artwork, perhaps this writer means by an Indonesian artist who does not reveal their Indonesianness, if you like, or the cultural heritage. Which do you think? Can you contemplate that? Does that make sense?
It was even the sentence is hard for me to comprehend.
That's my fault.
No, not at all.
In other words, do you think it's an advantage? Do you think it's an advantage to have a reference to Indonesian culture for an artist in Australia? Or do you think it is somehow a disadvantage? Perhaps that's not another way of thinking about it.
I mean, I guess Tintin also can answer this as much as myself here. I guess we can just also looking at back into into the perspective, and there is the idea of collecting works or appreciating works here throughout the history. For example, and also the media perceptions on the art or cultural review, and what we consume here, or what Australian consume, or what anyone else consume about your origin. If you are coming from China or Africa or Indonesia, if you like, yeah. Australia and other places are quite nationalistic. Consuming art has something to do with nationalism. It's almost like sport, but also at the same time, it is the desire to. I'm speaking not from the. I'm speaking on behalf of probably like institution and also collectors here, or assuming that way. And from what what I have known for, yeah. I mean, Avandi was. I don't think that he was speaking about a lot about Indonesia. I mean, a lot of his painting was about his face, and also big sun. Very expressive. And Avandi was one of a very early relation. He has like Melbourne patrons, from the 50s, 60s with different exchange. And then and then we look at through again the significance of how see Indonesian art was, of course, like the first Australia Pacific Art Pacific Triennale in '93. Then we can see there also, it's a way to engage with Indonesian politics through art, to understanding the whole context of Indonesia on that moment was through art, I suppose. Yeah, they speak about specifically about Indonesian issues, indeed, and variable of graphic, variable of messages, of personal perception, or with other methodology of working, references. Well, I'm sure Tintin can add me on this.
Thank you, Jumaadi. Tintin.
Yeah, well, thank you, Jumaadi. I wanted to say, like, you know, looking at the question at first, I was thinking, well, when you say Australian art world, what does that mean, right? So I guess there is a question there as well. Is it like the collecting institutions or the private collectors, or you know, or the audience, or and if we're talking of audience, which audience as well? But also then I looked at the question again, and this is actually quite a deep question that I think needs to be researched. This is actually really interesting. Maybe you can look at, you know, maybe you can look at Indonesian artists in Australia and see, you know, what institutions collect them, and in which collection. You know, is it Asian collection or is it Australian collection, or that in the structure, in the structural organization of the institutions? So yeah, so it is an interesting question which I can't really answer. I mean, you know, I can't really answer. I mean, from
that's a very helpful analysis.
Yeah?
I think
okay.
It's an invitation to all of us. Very, very helpful. Look, I'm just conscious that it's nearly, we've got about another 10 or so minutes, but I'm wondering if now I can sort of open to our speakers and also perhaps invite the audience members to contribute to the chat, to think about what I suppose each of us could do, but specifically there are people, for example, in Australia who have a deep extended knowledge of international culture, people and the art world. How can we sort of enable one another to tap into those networks? Are there Australian sort of cultural institutions perhaps that don't yet exist that could facilitate, you know, that kind of exchange in future? I think, you know, each of you has sort of described perhaps where your desire resides, like where you would like more from the relationship, if you like, or different. And I'm wondering, starting with all of you, perhaps Abdul-Rahman, do you have any thoughts on that, in terms of just what would help, I suppose, your relationship with Indonesian artists and that kind of exchange?
I guess there is no one place where that sort of information is being collated and held, you know, and there's things like Asialink and, you know, various organizations, and I know it's like Australia. I've encountered the intention from so many arts organizations to create. You know, they all love to talk about in their strategic visions this idea of exchange with Indonesia, and particularly in Perth with the Indian Ocean Rim. And I'm very cynical because it's very easy and it looks great on paper to talk about these things, but I have yet to see any real concrete steps taken towards. There is this assumption that here in Perth that the world will come to them, come to us, and I'm sitting there going, we have to go to the world. I mean that the world doesn't even know we're here. You know, we are really at the arse end of everything. But I would love, from personally as an artist, I would love it if that knowledge was just collated in some way within, you know, under the auspices of some organization or some government funded body, so that I could just get information before I embarked on anything. When I did go to particularly Makassar, I asked people, I was just sort of searching it. I was asking Jumaadi, I was like, so you know anyone in Makassar? And Randy's like, not really. You know, it's like, it's a really big place. So it would be, and you know, you reach out to people, but that just needs to be collated and made easier, because there are people in Australia who do have that sort of expertise and that, you know, that constant exchange. And so it just needs to be made. And having said that, in Australia, that same information just needs to be made available through whatever means and networks in Indonesia. And there's no reason, if the information's there, it needs to be bilingual. It needs to be, you know, made accessible. and it just seems like a matter of intention and money, and not vast amounts of money. This is, you know, this is cultural diplomacy. It should be happening now, but you know, the government we have. So, you know.
Thank you, Abdul-Rahman. I've just received a question as well through the chat, wondering if you, the artists, see deeper relations between Australia and Indonesia being linked to private collectors in Australia taking more of an interest in Indonesian art, or do you see future connections between our countries being driven more institutionally? This is an interesting question, even thinking about, you know, obviously Asialink Arts and Santy Saptari Consulting, you know, private public, which is a model that is internationally, really has a lot of currency at the moment. What are your thoughts on that in terms of Australia and its reception to Indonesian art?
Me personally, I think it has to come from an institutional level first. It's one of those things, we don't, as artists, we don't want to be relying on rich people to drive our exchange, because it doesn't happen like that. That's definitely a part of art, but it's not where art comes from. Yes, we want those people to come in, and we want those people to spend their money on Indonesian art. But we're not going to rely on that. It has to come from the top, from organizational point of view first, and then, you know, bring the money from, you know, wherever that may come from. Great, but it needs to be directed from normal people, not from rich people.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Jumaadi.
No, I guess saying that is if you compare it again to the previous sort of state, we are much more in Australia. I'm saying by we here is we are much more sort of, you know, a lot more institutions. They are quite open to you know, to get closer to Asian art. I guess like contemporary art in general anyway, and it's much more accessible even in the regional. You see a lot of regional town, even they have a big part of it is contemporary art. Just that it is actually broadening it, and a lot of universities gallery too are embracing contemporary art, you know, much more than, let's say, 20 years ago, of course. And without forgetting major institutions led by people that also much closer to Indonesia, you know, like we've seen much more work by Indonesian artists at the Art Gallery of New South Wales in our doorstep. Major exhibition at the National Gallery of Australia like last year, or maybe the year before. I think we are very optimistic of things here, and again, like, you know, things are going always in fashion, as Abdul-Rahman Abdullah mentioned that it has to be coming from the top, but I guess much more graduate from, you know, from the major universities to study Asian media repertoire about the art and culture from Indonesia. It will help the awareness of, otherwise we just yeah, one way or the other it has to tap all those you know, systems.
Thank you, Jumaadi. Tintin, raised
hand. Yeah, thanks Abdul-Rahman and Jumaadi for exploring that. I was also thinking back to what Abdul-Rahman from the institution, and, you know, like that's really clear here, because, you know, the system is that people vote for a government, and then, you know, the government is supposed to do what the people want, right? So then, you know, like it's not just in the hands of the rich. Now, I think looking at you know, like we're talking about Australia and Indonesia here, looking at from the Indonesia side, Is the trust is the trust in the government the same there as well? So that's one question, I guess. And the differences, if there are differences, then like how do we sort of, because like government to government organizations, for example, they work within that structure, right? But then I guess the impact on everyday life would be different, I guess. Depending on how the government is run as well, I guess. Yeah, I would just like to raise that, because if we ask about whether Australia-Indonesia relationship is going to be driven by it, if the question is whether it will be driven by institutions or private, then we need to take into account both systems, right? So yeah, so I guess that's my contribution to that.
Thank you, Tintin. And I think, look, we're just in the last minutes now, so please, if anybody has an urgent question, or please do not hesitate to ask it now. But I'm just wondering, I mean, I suppose, it's important also to refer continuing challenges brought by COVID-19. And I know that a number of you have had significant impacts in terms not only of the terrible effects for family and friends, but also the effect on art projects. And I'm wondering, what your thoughts are in terms of, to use your term, what are the opportunities for adaptation, but also what are the challenges when we think about international exchange at this time and potentially going forward, into the foreseeable future. Febie, would you like to, I know you've been directly affected.
Yeah, I mean, from our previous conversations with Bala, like you're asking, did the pandemic situation really affected your how you exhibit it, and yes, it's really for example, like last year's, most our projects being postponed, and then yeah, it's really affects us a lot. But I think people in here, they're trying, this kind of OVR, or maybe a virtual exhibitions, which is maybe works in a way. But for example, when we were thinking about how we deal with the installation pieces, or maybe a video that need kind of a real-time internet based, but happening in a one space, it's really hard to do some things like that. But I think maybe I will doing this in more kind of an optimist way, maybe in a year, or maybe in the 2 years, it will be people will kind of adapt to this kind of situations. And then me as an artist, personally, it's kind of it's kind of we do have this kind of a year to do some kind of an experimentations with the media itself. So I think it's kind of it's a bad year, since also it's a good year because we now could focusing in our works, and then how to deal with this a new platforms, because we're talking about virtually right now, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that will be my answers.
Thank you, Febie. Any of the other artists like to comment?
Yeah. Can I?
Please.
So I was actually very fortunate to have won this grant for my next 2-year project. And my first reaction, this was last year, my first reaction when I got it, I was like, oh my God, how am I going to do this? Because the plan was to do, to fly people around, to do public gatherings, and that was going to be, that is going to be impossible. But, I calmed down and thought, okay, come on, this is a 2-year grant. You can't just, make it happen, And so I think, so I've been basically prototyping as Febie, I guess also it's a virtual workshopping basically, so with actually I'm engaging partners in Indonesia as well, and they are actually in the risk group. I'm actually working with Dialita, a women survivor choir group who won human rights, Gwangju Human Rights Awards in 2019. So I'm basically converting the virtual travel budget into, the travel budget into a virtual travel budget, basically to strengthen their internet infrastructures, for example, and then finding formats to, because they are a choir, so singing is, is core. So basically trying to work that out with them as well. But I think people are actually, we feel all this together, right? Of course, I think in Australia, some people are quite protected, but when we say protected as well, how protected can you be? Mentally, you hear people die. I've just actually lost 2 really dear friends and mentors actually in Jakarta this week. So, you can't be, totally protected basically. And so, yeah, so I think people are trying to, lift each other's spirits up. And I'm just really hopeful of that as well. And in the US as well, I did a residency in Chicago a few years back, and it was in a very significant time when Trump was elected. And so, the bonding that we had through that was quite, I would say, quite strong. And a young curator contacted me to, work together on a project, and I just immediately, said yes. And so I think, yeah, I'm hopeful that we can work together through this. So yeah.
Tintin, thank you so much. Look, we've sort of reached the end of the session now. That's a melancholy note to end on, but also I thank all of you for your generous sharing and openness. Really, I think all of us here in the room could listen to you talk for days, and I know that I could. I really appreciate your frankness and your willingness to share, and obviously to end on a note of optimism. With people like you, right? Let us just determine to reach out more directly and to share this knowledge and to exchange and to make the most of these ever more precious opportunities to get together. I wanted to thank deeply Tintin Wulia, Abdul-Rahman Abdullah, Jumaadi, and Febie Babyrose. You have been absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much. And again, Santy, Saptari and Pippa Dixon for organising this. All of you in the room, thank you. We sense your thoughtfulness and your engagement, and it means a lot to all of us. If I might ask us all just to contemplate as we go our separate ways this Saturday, what we can do individually to make the most of these opportunities in our small ways. And as well, one of the things we can do is join the second in this series, same time, same place, Sally Smart and Farah Wadani, who will discuss institutions and advocacy in the context of Indonesia-Australians. Today, we've been really privileged to hear directly from artists, which is a totally appropriate note to start the series. Thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful weekend. And most importantly, stay well and let us buoy one another. Keep us up, all of us together. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye.